Johnny Carson, he sing. How come he didn't sing on Arsenio?
In the old days, which I guess.
Growing up in the orbit of a legend doesn't guarantee clarity. Sometimes it creates even more confusion. Mark spent his life close to Sammy Davis Jr., yet never fully certain of his place. Adopted, they said. End of story. Except it never felt like the end. A final, deeply personal confession shattered the simplicity of that explanation, leaving Mark with a truth too heavy to ignore and too fragile to confront. Years passed before he dared to dig deeper, and when he did, the evidence only complicated things further. Documents contradicted memories, loved ones disagreed, and the past refused to stay buried. Eventually, emotion gave way to evidence. Science entered a story long ruled by secrecy. And after half a century of unanswered questions, one DNA test would finally decide what words never could. The accident that changed everything. Sammy Davis Jr. did not grow into show business so much as he was carried into it. His mother danced at the Apollo in Harlem. His father lived his life on the vaudeville circuit. The stage was not something Sammy discovered. It was the environment he was raised in. Before he could even walk properly, he was already performing. He had no lines and no real role, but he had a face full of expression and timing that came naturally. Audiences loved him instantly. That early magic was wrapped in a family that didn't last. When Sammy was 3, his parents separated. His father took custody and went straight back on the road, bringing his son with him. Hotels, theaters, and train stations became Sammy's childhood. By the time he was 4, he had already performed in dozens of cities. He loved the life, not realizing that his father and their partner Will Mastin were quietly shielding him from a harsher truth. The 3 of them became the Will Mastin Trio, working steadily across the country. They were talented and respected on stage, but off-stage, they were 3 black men navigating a deeply hostile America. Insults, threats, and discrimination followed them everywhere. The adults softened it for Sammy, brushing it off as jealousy, trying to preserve his innocence as long as they could. That bubble burst in 1944 when Sammy was drafted into the U.S. Army and placed into its first integrated infantry unit. For the first time, he was alone in a system that did not protect him. He faced constant abuse from white soldiers, daily fights, humiliation, and cruelty. It was here that he finally understood what his father had been hiding from him his whole life. When he returned to show business after the war, he returned changed, more driven, more focused. He knew now that talent alone would not be enough. He would have to be undeniable. That moment came in 1951 at Ciro's in Hollywood. The trio was booked for a short set, but Sammy saw the room was filled with Hollywood royalty. He raised his energy, unleashed his impressions, and won the room completely. The crowd refused to let him leave the stage. That night didn't just launch him, it introduced him to an industry that could no longer ignore him. His career exploded. Offers poured in. Even a television deal appeared, only to be quietly killed when advertisers refused to sponsor a black lead. Progress was happening, but it was uneven and fragile. Then came the Vegas breakthrough. The trio landed a major residency at the New Frontier, earning real money and finally being treated with dignity. They were even offered rooms at the hotel itself, something that had never happened before. It felt like they had crossed into a new world. To celebrate, Sammy's mentors bought him a brand new Cadillac. It was a symbol of arrival, but it became the vehicle that nearly ended everything. Driving through the night toward Los Angeles after a long stretch of work, Sammy collided with another car, making a sudden turn. The impact drove his face into the center of the steering wheel. The design of that model included a sharp, protruding horn, a detail that would later be changed because of what happened to him. Sammy lost his left eye. The injury was devastating, but what frightened him more was the thought that his career might be over. Performing was not what he did. It was who he was. During recovery, he rebuilt himself physically and emotionally. He relearned balance, movement, and confidence. He explored faith, history, and identity, eventually converting to Judaism after deep conversations with close friends and years of study. When he finally returned to the stage, he was met not with pity, but with admiration. The industry showed up for him. His peers embraced him. For the first time, he felt that he truly belonged. As Sammy rose higher, the roles around him shifted. His father stepped back with grace. Will Maston struggled with the change. Even as Sammy became the star, he kept the trio's name on the billing out of loyalty and gratitude. But the world had moved forward, and Sammy was now leading it. He had been shaped by talent, pain, survival, and relentless work. The boy who once danced for spare change had become a man who stood at the center of American entertainment. Not because the world made space for him, but because he carved it out himself. Hollywood's unforgivable romance. By the late 1950s, Sammy Davis Jr. was no longer just famous. He was untouchable. He was earning about $25,000 a week at the Sands in Las Vegas, dominating radio, packing out nightclubs, and finally getting another serious shot at television. On paper, everything was perfect. But offstage, the world felt uglier than ever. The higher he climbed, the more visible he became, and the more hate came with it. The insults got louder. The barriers became more obvious. And after years of swallowing it, Sammy reached a breaking point. He was tired of being polite, tired of being grateful, tired of pretending that success protected him from racism when it clearly didn't. So he stopped playing defense. For years, women had been a part of the lifestyle, not the story. There were flings, affairs, and brief connections that came and went with the tour schedule. None of it slowed him down. None of it really mattered. Until one night in 1957 at Chez Perret in Chicago. That night, Sammy looked out from the stage and locked eyes with one woman in the crowd. Her name was Kim Novak. And that moment would ripple far beyond either of them. Kim Novak was not just a movie star, she was a studio creation. A carefully designed response to another star, another woman, and one man's wounded pride. That man was Harry Cohn, the feared and powerful head of Columbia Pictures. Cohn ran his studio like a dictatorship. He tracked employees, controlled careers, crushed resistance, and ruled through intimidation. People didn't admire him. They feared him. And that fear was exactly how he wanted it. Cohn had built Columbia from a struggling studio into a major force, but he was never satisfied with success alone. He wanted dominance. He wanted loyalty. And above all, he wanted control. He had once taken full credit for discovering and shaping Rita Hayworth, and over time, that pride became something darker, a sense of ownership. When Hayworth's personal life kept pulling her away from his influence, especially through a series of marriages, Cohn took it personally. When Rita slipped out of his control, Cohn decided to replace her. So when a young woman from Chicago walked into his office, beautiful, inexperienced, and unknown, he saw his chance. Her name was Marilyn Novak. The studio renamed her Kim Novak, reshaped her body, recolored her hair, rebuilt her wardrobe, and relocated her into a tightly controlled environment where her image and movements could be managed around the clock. She wasn't being developed. She was being engineered. And then she met Sammy Davis Jr. What began as a private relationship between two public figures quickly became something explosive. Not because of who they were individually, but because of what they represented together. A black superstar and a white-blonde Hollywood icon in 1950s. America was not just gossip, it was confrontation. It challenged social rules, racial boundaries, studio power, and cultural fear all at once. For Sammy, it was personal. It was emotional. It was defiant. For the industry, it was a threat. The backlash was swift and vicious. Studio executives panicked. Politicians weighed in. Gossip columns ignited. The relationship became a lightning rod in the middle of a country already tense over race, power, and identity. What started as two people finding each other in a crowded room turned into a national controversy. Not because of love, but because of what that love symbolized. It all began in 1957 at Chez Paree, one of Chicago's most electric nightclubs. On that stage stood Sammy Davis Jr., already crowned by many as the greatest entertainer alive. Cigarette in hand, sharp suit pressed to perfection, he looked like he belonged on a movie poster. As the lights hit him, he did something bold. He locked eyes with a woman seated near the stage and began singing directly to her. That woman was Kim Novak. She had just wrapped filming Vertigo with Alfred Hitchcock and was sitting there quietly, drink in hand, watching one of the biggest stars in the world perform just for her. That night would be the first and last time they were ever seen together in public. This was the 1950s, an era where a biracial relationship was not just frowned upon, but openly dangerous. And somehow, that danger became part of the pull. Davis later described what they shared as equal parts rebellion and romance. They knew exactly what they were doing, and in a way, that was the point. Still, they tried to keep it quiet. But Hollywood was a terrible place to hide a secret. Everyone watched everyone, and gossip moved faster than the truth. Things unraveled at a party at Tony Curtis's house. Sammy and Kim let their guard down, just a little. One guest saw the opportunity and ran with it, tipping off Dorothy Kilgallen, the powerful Hearst gossip columnist who thrived on scandal. Her next column played coy, but made her point. She teased a mystery romance between a famous blonde actress and a major entertainer. No names were needed. The message landed loud and clear. The public reaction was loud, but that was the least of their problems. The real danger began once the studio executives caught wind of it. Sammy knew immediately that the game had changed. He called Kim as soon as he saw the column, expecting caution. What he got instead was defiance. She made it clear the studio did not own her and invited him over for dinner at her Beverly Hills home. She believed they could outlast the noise. What she underestimated was Harry Cohn. Cohn, the iron-fisted head of Columbia Pictures, saw Kim Novak as his personal investment. And he was not about to let Sammy Davis Jr. threaten that image. To him, this was not romance. It was contamination. As pressure closed in, Davis grew restless. He could tell Kim was pushing back at the system through him. She was rebelling against a lifetime of control. But the risk was not shared evenly. Kim had a studio contract. Sammy had a target on his back. Even so, his anger fueled him. He had endured abuse from white audiences his entire career, and this felt like a rare chance to push back. For a while, they stayed in it together, meeting quietly at home, exchanging secret messages, trying to carve out privacy where none existed. Eventually, Cohn found out for certain while attending a memorial dinner in New York. The discovery sent him into such a rage that he reportedly suffered a mild heart attack on the spot. Despite everything, The relationship continued as an open secret for months. The comments were vicious, the pressure relentless. But the real collapse came by accident. While quietly planning their wedding, a clerk at the marriage license office leaked the news. Overnight, the rumors became headlines. Cohn was no ordinary studio boss. He ran a tight operation with spies tracking Novak's every move. Los Angeles reporters were everywhere, hungry for blood. To avoid being seen, Davis resorted to humiliation. When visiting Kim, he could not drive himself. A friend would take the wheel while Sammy lay curled on the floor of the back seat, hidden under a rug. One of the most famous entertainers on Earth reduced to hiding like contraband. And worse was coming. Cohn had deep connections to organized crime and no fear of using them. When it became clear that Sammy and Kim would not back down, Cohn decided to make an example of him. Sammy was allegedly kidnapped and held for hours, just long enough to break his resolve. Then came the final message, delivered to his father. If Sammy did not immediately marry a black woman, men would be sent to break his legs and destroy his remaining eye. That was the line. Love could not survive a death sentence. Later, Sammy's assistant, Arthur Silber, walked into their suite at the Sands Hotel and found him frantic, flipping through an address book. When asked what was happening, Sammy explained that he had received the call and now had to find someone to marry immediately. He landed on Lorraine White, a local dancer. Sammy invited her to his suite and made an offer that stunned her. He would pay her to marry him. The arrangement would last 1 year. After that, they would quietly separate. He believed 12 months might be enough to make the threat disappear. Lorraine agreed. Sammy was devastated, but trapped. What made it worse was the applause that followed. The first congratulatory call came from Evelyn Cunningham, a towering voice in the black press. She had long criticized Sammy for dating white women and saw this marriage as him finally doing the right thing. She was thrilled. If she had known the truth behind it, the celebration would have stopped cold. Now, Sammy's first wedding was anything but a fairy tale. On paper, it sounded fine. The ceremony was set in the Emerald Room at the Sands Hotel, a place built for glamour and romance. But from the very beginning, everything felt wrong. The bride arrived 40 minutes late to a ceremony that lasted less than 2 minutes. It was rushed, tense, and heavy with unspoken truth. Sammy was drinking just to get through it. The weight of what he was doing sat on his chest like a stone. Hours later, that weight nearly killed him. His assistant, Arthur Silber, had to physically wrestle a gun out of Sammy's hands to stop him from pulling the trigger. By the end of that night, Sammy and Lorraine White were legally married. Emotionally, they were nowhere close. Lorraine wasted no time enjoying the benefits. Once she became Mrs. Sammy Davis Jr., she went on a shopping spree that turned heads across Hollywood. Jet magazine even published a photo of her proudly displaying 20 brand new pairs of shoes. Sammy kept the gifts coming, almost like he was trying to pay off the guilt he carried for dragging her into his mess. He put her up in the presidential suite at the Sands, but she slept there alone. While Lorraine was shopping, Sammy was unraveling. After 6 months of living inside a lie, he paid her $25,000 just to agree to a divorce. Even then, it took 3 long years before the paperwork was finally complete. And Kim Novak was gone too. Once Sammy let go of their relationship, Kim did the same. The romance had once felt bold and rebellious, but the pressure crushed whatever spark remained. Friends stopped calling her. Her agent delivered an ultimatum that left no room for interpretation. Stay with Sammy, and her career was over. So she stepped away, quietly and completely. That chapter closed. But another one was already opening. By 1959, Sammy had been welcomed into Frank Sinatra's inner circle, a loose, legendary group that would soon become known around the world as the Rat Pack. Frank may have led it, but he didn't start it. The original version belonged to Humphrey Bogart, a man who hated phoniness and built his circle around people who felt real to him. Back then, they called themselves the Holmby Hills Rat Pack. It was a rotating crew of stars, rebels, and late-night thinkers. After Bogart passed away in 1957, Sinatra stepped in and reshaped the group. At first, Frank wanted to call it the Clan. Sammy shut that down immediately for obvious reasons. The name felt dangerous, loaded, and far too close to something ugly. Frank tried again with the Summit, but that didn't stick either. The name Rat Pack supposedly came from a long night of poker and drinking. By morning, the guys looked rough, hungover, rumpled, and half awake. Actress Angie Dickinson took one look at them and said they looked like a pack of rats. The nickname landed, and it never left. Whether that story is true or not, almost doesn't matter. A similar version had already existed with Bogart and Lauren Bacall years earlier. Either way, the name fit the energy. At first, the group was loose and fluid. It wasn't just men. It included some of the biggest stars in Hollywood, gathering at Bogart's house long before Las Vegas became the center of it all. Actors like David Niven, Robert Mitchum, and Spencer Tracy mixed with icons like Ava Gardner, Katharine Hepburn, Judy Garland, and Elizabeth Taylor. After Bogart's death, the shape of the group solidified. By the time the 1960s rolled in, it had become the famous five: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, and Sammy Davis Jr. They didn't just perform in Las Vegas, they transformed it. Their presence turned the Strip into a cultural magnet. Other stars followed: Liberace, Marlene Dietrich, Elvis Presley. Even people you wouldn't expect, like Debbie Reynolds and Ronald Reagan, took the stage under the neon lights. Television was exploding across America, and networks were desperate for spectacle. Vegas delivered it in glittering live broadcasts that made the city feel larger than life. By the late 1950s, millions of visitors were flooding into the Strip every year, chasing that glow. Then came Ocean's 11. The movie followed Danny Ocean and his crew as they pulled off a stylish, impossible casino heist. The plot was fun, but the real magic was the image. The Rat Pack walking away from the sands, their names glowing behind them in massive neon letters. That moment sealed it. They weren't just entertainers anymore. They were symbols of an era. And yet, even they couldn't outshine the city itself. By then, Las Vegas had become the most glamorous, star-soaked, and irresistible town in America. A place where dreams were sold in lights and music, and everyone wanted to be part of the show. From Hollywood glory to personal collapse. After everything that happened with Kim Novak, it would have made sense for Sammy Davis Jr. to avoid romance altogether. But he didn't. By 1960, he had fallen deeply in love again, this time with a Swedish actress named May Britt. Their relationship moved fast, and soon they were engaged. For Sammy, this felt like a fresh start. There was no powerful studio boss pulling strings behind the scenes, no hidden threats, no secret meetings. For the first time, he believed he might actually be free to marry the woman he loved. But the world had changed, and not in his favor. Sammy was now more famous than ever, especially after joining the Rat Pack. Ironically, that success turned his private life into a political problem. At the same time, John F. Kennedy was running for president, and the Rat Pack had become a public symbol of his celebrity support. When Sammy appeared at the Democratic National Convention, he was met not with applause, but with loud boos. The reason was simple and cruel. Everyone knew he was engaged to a white woman, and at that time, most of the country still rejected interracial marriage. The backlash was immediate. Hate mail flooded the Kennedy campaign, and Sammy became the lightning rod for it all. Campaign officials panicked. They worried that his relationship would hurt their chances at the election. Quiet pressure began to build behind the scenes, and eventually it reached Frank Sinatra, who had been expected to stand beside Sammy at the wedding. Sammy understood what was happening. He saw that Sinatra was trapped between loyalty and politics, so he made the choice himself. He postponed his wedding until after the election, sacrificing his own happiness to protect the people around him. Kennedy won, and days later, Sinatra did stand with Sammy when he finally married May Britt. But the era that had lifted him up was already starting to collapse. Once Kennedy entered the White House, he began distancing himself from Sinatra, largely because of Sinatra's rumored criminal connections. That distance cracked the Rat Pack from the inside. Frank blamed Peter Lawford, Kennedy's brother-in-law, and pushed him out of the group. After that, the unity faded. Then came more losses. Marilyn Monroe died. Kennedy was assassinated. The optimism of the early 1960s dissolved into something darker. At the same time, pop culture shifted. The British invasion arrived. New sounds, new faces, new energy. The image of 5 men in tuxedos no longer felt cutting edge. They suddenly looked like the past. Sammy's personal life didn't stabilize either. He and May Britt had a daughter, Tracy, and adopted 2 sons, Mark and Jeff. But Sammy was rarely home. The stage always came first. The marriage, strained from the start, slowly fell apart. After 8 years, it ended. That was when Sammy began to unravel. His habits grew heavier. Drinking increased. The parties became darker. His circle changed. The energy around him shifted from glamorous to unsettling. He was still a legendary performer, but offstage he seemed restless, haunted, and increasingly detached from the life he had built. He eventually married again, this time to Altavisi Gore. Some believed he hoped that marrying a black woman would finally give him the sense of belonging he had never fully felt. But the marriage was troubled from the beginning. Sammy was struggling with addiction and compulsive behavior, and Altavisi found herself trapped in a relationship that felt more like a burden than a partnership. The chaos spilled into his family life. He hired his adopted son Mark to work with him, hoping to build a closer bond. Instead, tension grew. They clashed over relationships, boundaries, and unresolved resentment. At one point, Sammy cut off contact with Mark for months over a personal dispute, only reconnecting later under heavy emotional weight. That reconnection came near the end. As Sammy's health declined, he called Mark to his side and revealed something that would reshape Mark's entire understanding of his life. He told him that he was not just his adopted son, but his biological son. Mark later found a birth certificate listing Sammy as his father. But when he asked May Britt if she was his mother, she denied it. That contradiction reopened the mystery rather than closing it. It suggested that Mark may have been the result of a hidden relationship, protected from public view in a time when the truth could have destroyed careers and lives. So even as Sammy Davis Jr.'s story came to its end, questions remained. He had conquered the stage, reshaped entertainment, and broken barriers few others could touch. But behind the applause and the spotlight was a life marked by sacrifice, longing, and unfinished truths. And in the end, even the man who had everything left behind mysteries that no amount of fame could ever fully explain. By the time Sammy finally told his son the truth about his parentage, it was not some dramatic moment of clarity or closure. It was a goodbye. He was dying, and he knew it. The trouble had started a couple of years earlier, in 1988, with a pain in his throat that would not go away. Sammy had smoked heavily his entire life, and he had a favorite habit on stage: blowing thick clouds of smoke into the air while holding those long, powerful notes. Years before, Nat King Cole had warned him that the little flourish would eventually destroy his voice. Sammy laughed it off. He loved the way it looked. He loved the way it felt. But the damage kept building, and eventually, the nodes on his vocal cords turned into cancer. The strange part was that he did not slow down. He kept performing, night after night, almost as if nothing was wrong. If anything, people said his voice sounded better, stronger, richer. It felt like one last brilliant run. Around that same time, there was talk of reviving the old magic. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy agreed to reunite for a big Rat Pack tour. On paper, it sounded legendary. In reality, it was a mess from the start. Dean Martin looked distant and detached on stage, slurring his words, forgetting lyrics, and barely hiding his irritation with the audience. One night in Oakland, he even flicked a lit cigarette into the crowd. Sinatra was furious. Backstage, tempers exploded. And in one infamous moment, Frank smashed a plate of spaghetti over Dean's head. That tour collapsed almost immediately. Dean walked away after just a few shows, claiming health issues, then reappeared in Vegas days later joking about it. The joke landed, but the friendship did not recover. A bond that had lasted decades quietly broke, and it was never really repaired until the very end of Dean's life. Meanwhile, Sammy's condition kept getting worse. Doctors eventually told him that surgery was the only option left, but it came with a brutal price. If he had it, he would never sing again. For most people, that would have been an easy choice. For Sammy, it was unthinkable. Singing was not just what he did. It was who he was. He refused the surgery, fully aware that he was choosing a shorter life over a silent one. As if that was not cruel enough, betrayal followed. While he was fighting cancer, people he trusted began stealing from him. Art disappeared. Jewelry vanished. Priceless memorabilia was taken from his home. It was a quiet kind of theft, but it cut deeper than any headline ever had. Sammy Davis Jr. died on May 16, 1990. The very next day, the IRS arrived at his house to seize his assets. He had fallen millions behind on his taxes, and now the bill was due. Because Sammy and Altovise had filed jointly, the debt became hers too. The glamorous life she had entered ended not with comfort, but with lawsuits, liquidation, and poverty. She sold what she could. Friends stepped in and organized benefit shows to help her survive. Even so, her later years were marked by hardship, isolation, and heartbreak. She eventually passed away in 2009, far from the glittering world she had once lived in. And yet, even at the very end, one part of Sammy's story came full circle. Kim Novak visited him in the hospital when she heard he was dying. Sammy asked someone to bring his finest silk robe and pajamas because he still wanted to look his best for her. They sat together quietly, talking, remembering, and finally, just being in the same space again. Their love had never been allowed to exist freely in its time. It had been crushed by fear, politics, and prejudice. But in that hospital room, none of that mattered anymore. It was just two people sharing a last moment, after a lifetime of everything else getting in the way. After 50 years, DNA test confirms truth about Sammy Davis Jr.'s son. After years of quietly chasing his father's attention, always finding small excuses just to be in the same space as him, Mark finally heard the words he had been waiting for his whole life. But he didn't hear them in a warm, everyday moment. He heard them at the very end. As his father lay on his deathbed, he called Mark over, pulled him close, and spoke words that would change everything. He told Mark that he was his son, not adopted, his son. It was a simple sentence, but it landed like an earthquake. From that moment on, Mark couldn't stop replaying it in his mind, wondering what his father truly meant and why he had waited until the very end to say it. Up until then, Mark had always been presented to the world as adopted. Friends and family had whispered different stories over the years, suggesting that Sammy Davis Jr. was actually his biological father, but Mark never fully believed it. Not until the man himself said it. That single moment stayed with him for decades, turning into a question he couldn't escape. In 2013, 24 years after Sammy's death, Mark finally found a piece of the puzzle. He tracked down his original birth certificate, and there it was in black and white. Sammy Davis Jr. listed as his biological father. Instead of bringing peace, the document raised even more questions. It also named Sammy's second wife, May Britt, as his biological mother. When Mark went to her for answers, she denied ever giving birth to him and refused to explain who his real mother was. That pushed Mark toward a painful possibility that he may have been a secret child from an earlier relationship, hidden to protect everyone involved during a time when interracial relationships were heavily stigmatized. In that context, presenting him as adopted may have felt like the only safe option. Certain details always made the adoption story feel off to Mark. His parents had a daughter only a year younger than him, which made it strange that they would adopt an older child right afterward. He also felt he shared physical traits with his father, and even saw echoes of Sammy in his own son, especially in his natural musical rhythm. Still, Mark felt like a man without a clear origin story, someone living with a question mark where certainty should be. Not everyone saw it that way. His sister Tracy always believed the adoption story and found the speculation upsetting. The disagreement eventually led them to take a public DNA test. The results showed that Mark and Tracy were not biologically related. The test didn't change how they felt about each other. Their bond stayed strong, and their family stood together, making it clear that love mattered more than genetics. For Mark, the results closed one long open door but revealed several new ones. One mystery was solved, but the deeper story of where he truly came from remained just out of reach, still waiting to be understood.